Ryan's office revenge. 12%. Victoria Sterling's laughter echoed through her glass corner office like a slap across the face. At your age, Brandon, we're thinking more about transitional roles. Maybe a part-time advisory position would be a better fit. She couldn't even finish the sentence without another wave of laughter shaking her shoulders, her Stanford MBA diploma gleaming on the wall behind her like some kind of trophy. I stood there frozen, clutching my portfolio of 18 years' worth of achievements, watching this 35-year-old CEO with her perfectly styled blonde hair dismiss everything I'd built at this company. The leather folder in my hands contained documentation of every major project, every system I'd designed, every weekend I'd sacrificed while she collected bonuses large enough to buy vacation homes. I'm Brandon Cooper, by the way, 50 years old, Director of Cloud Engineering at Tech Vault Solutions. Until that moment, I was the kind of guy who believed hard work eventually gets recognized, the pure kind of guy who stayed loyal to one company for 18 years, while watching 26-year-old developers with half my experience get promoted because they understood TikTok better than enterprise architecture. My wife Amanda calls me stubborn. My kids think I'm ancient because I still prefer documentation over Slack messages. But what Victoria didn't understand was that my so-called outdated approach had kept their precious infrastructure running flawlessly for nearly 2 decades. While she was getting her MBA and learning about disruptive innovation, I was in server rooms at 3 a.m., making sure her billion-dollar company didn't crash. The cloud migration project I designed saved us $8.5 million annually, I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. The security framework that prevented 5 major breach attempts last year, including that ransomware attack that would have cost us everything. Victoria waved her hand dismissively, still chuckling as she leaned back in her ergonomic chair that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. Her office was all glass and chrome, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking San Francisco Bay. Everything designed to intimidate, to remind you of the hierarchy. Everyone's replaceable, Brandon. Even senior engineers with decades of experience. The market's changed. We need agile thinkers, not legacy mindsets. She stared at me with that practiced CEO smile that never reached her eyes. Maybe it's time to think seriously about that advisory transition. Consulting work can be very fulfilling. I felt something crack inside me. Not my heart exactly, but something deeper. The foundation of 18 years of believing that eventually experience would matter more than age bias. That loyalty would be rewarded. That the company I'd helped build from a 200-person startup into a 2,000-employee corporation would remember who got them there. I had asked for a 12% raise, from $210,000 to $235,000. After 18 years of service, after building their entire security infrastructure from scratch, after saving them millions in breaches and downtime. 12% seemed reasonable, especially when healthcare premiums were eating 18% of my take-home pay and my kids' college costs were killing us financially. I understand, I said quietly, collecting my portfolio. The pages trembled between my fingers as I tried to maintain whatever dignity I had left. Through the glass walls, I could see my colleagues pretending not to watch, their heads buried in monitors while they strained to hear every word. Listen, Brandon. Victoria's voice shifted to that artificial tone of concern that managers learn in leadership seminars. You're good at what you do, I'll give you that. But you're expensive. The board sees a senior engineer pulling $210,000 when we can hire 2 computer science graduates for that same price. Fresh perspectives, modern frameworks. That's just business, nothing personal, nothing personal. As if 18 years of my life was just a business transaction. As if the nights I'd stayed until midnight debugging critical systems while she was networking at wine tastings weren't personal. as if missing my daughter's graduation because of a server crisis wasn't personal. That's when I knew exactly what I was going to do. I walked back through the open office to my workspace. Not even an office after 18 years, just a corner desk, because open office culture promotes collaboration. My computer screen displayed the usual flood of notifications. Slack messages from junior developers asking me to review their code. Emails from other departments begging me to fix problems they'd created. Next to my keyboard sat a photo from last Christmas. Amanda looking determined after her surgery, still dealing with physical therapy twice a week. The surgery and rehab had cost us $12,000 out of pocket, even with insurance. Sophia, my 22-year-old daughter, stressed about her MBA program that was costing us $48,000 a year. Lucas, my 20-year-old son, already worried about engineering school debt. Healthcare premiums were eating $37,800 of my gross pay annually. The kids' education was draining our savings faster than I could rebuild them. And here I was being laughed at for asking for a 12% raise after 18 years. Meanwhile, Victoria had just bought her second vacation home, according to the company newsletter. A ski lodge in Aspen to go with her beach house in Monterey. The same newsletter that featured her accepting an innovation award for the security framework I'd designed. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a small leather notebook I'd kept for years. The cover was worn from handling, filled with ideas I jotted down during lunch breaks, weekend thoughts, solutions that came to me during my commute. Inside were my personal projects, documented meticulously with dates, development notes, and implementation details. This wasn't company property. This was my intellectual playground. The notebook contained algorithms I'd written on my home computer, security protocols I'd refined in my garage lab on weekends, machine learning models I'd trained using my own hardware, code that Tech Vault had implemented without formal acquisition, because I'd been too trusting, too eager to be seen as a team player, too naive to understand that corporate loyalty was a one-way street. I flipped through the pages, each entry a reminder of nights and weekends spent building the future while my family slept. Page after page of innovations that had become the backbone of Tech Vault's competitive advantage. The irony was bitter. Victoria saw me as outdated, but every major system keeping her company ahead of competitors had originated in this notebook. I stopped at my notes from April 2021. A series of machine learning algorithms for advanced threat detection that I developed during the pandemic lockdown. At the top of the page, written in my own handwriting, personal project, predictive security framework using neural networks developed on home system 4/15/21. Below it, detailed Git commit logs from my personal GitHub account, time-stamped and documented. What Victoria never knew, what Tech Vault's legal department had been too careless to investigate, was that I'd never signed over the rights to these personal innovations. The standard employment contract I'd signed 18 years ago covered work done during company time using company resources. But my most valuable creations lived in a legal gray area, personal projects developed on my equipment during my time. I pulled up my personal GitHub account on my phone, scrolling through repositories I'd created over the years. Hundreds of commits, thousands of lines of code, all time-stamped and documented. The threat detection system that saved Tech Vault millions, originally developed as a weekend project to secure my home network. The cloud optimization framework that earned Victoria that innovation award, I'd built the core algorithms while experimenting with reducing my personal server costs. Every major breakthrough that Tech Vault claimed as their intellectual property had started as my personal curiosity, my private tinkering, my unpaid passion for solving complex problems. I'd shared these innovations with the company out of loyalty, never thinking to protect my own interests, never imagining that the company I'd helped build would one day laugh at my request for fair compensation. My computer pinged with another email from HR about the quarterly company newsletter. The headline made my stomach turn. TechVault's revolutionary security platform wins industry recognition. There was Victoria's photo again, accepting another award for work that had kept me awake for months. The article quoted her talking about fostering innovation and building breakthrough technology without mentioning a single member of the engineering team. I thought about my father, who'd worked 35 years at the same manufacturing plant before they shipped his job overseas. Loyalty matters, he'd always said. Take care of the company, and the company will take care of you. He'd believed that right up until the day they handed him a pink slip and a pension that evaporated when the company declared bankruptcy. My mother had echoed the same sentiment, working as a secretary for 40 years at a law firm that replaced her with a computer system when she turned 60. They'd given her a cake and a gold watch, then escorted her out the same day. Companies don't care about loyalty anymore, she'd told me afterward. They care about quarterly profits. I should have listened to them both. Instead, I'd spent 18 years building someone else's empire, believing that hard work and dedication would eventually be rewarded. Victoria's laughter had shattered that illusion like glass. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a contact I'd saved, but never used. Hunter Walsh, CTO of Quantum Secure Solutions, TechVault's biggest competitor. We'd connected on LinkedIn 2 years ago after he'd reached out following a tech conference where I'd presented on cloud security. His messages had been persistent but respectful, always professional. His last LinkedIn message, sent just 3 months ago, was still unread. Brandon, I've been following TechVault's security innovations, and I know talent when I see it. The offer still stands whenever you're ready to have a real conversation. We value experience here, not just energy. We believe gray hair means wisdom, not obsolescence. At the time, I'd been flattered, but dismissive. I was loyal to TechVault. I believed in the mission. I thought Victoria, despite her youth and corporate speak, understood my value to the organization. How naive that seemed now. My fingers hovered over the call button. 18 years of corporate conditioning screamed at me to stop, to be reasonable, to not burn bridges. What if this was just a bad day? What if Victoria reconsidered? What if I could find a way to work within the system instead of abandoning it? Then I remembered her words. Maybe it's time to think seriously about that advisory transition. The dismissive wave of her hand. The way she'd talked about me like I was a piece of outdated equipment that needed to be recycled. The complete lack of respect for everything I'd built for this company. I thought about Amanda fighting through physical therapy while worrying about medical bills. About Sophia working 20 hours a week at a coffee shop to help pay for textbooks because her dad couldn't afford to give her a better life, despite 18 years of loyal service. About Lucas, who'd already started talking about community college instead of engineering school because he didn't want to burden us with debt. My family deserved better than a father who accepted being undervalued. They deserved someone who fought for what he was worth, who refused to be discarded like outdated hardware. Victoria had made it clear that loyalty meant nothing to her. Maybe it was time to show her what disloyalty looked like. I pressed call. Hunter Walsh speaking. The voice was warm, professional, with none of the artificial corporate enthusiasm I'd grown used to at TechVault. Real confidence, not the manufactured kind that came from MBA programs. This is Brandon Cooper from TechVault. I think it's time we had that conversation you mentioned. There was a pause, then genuine excitement in his voice. Brandon, I was beginning to think you'd never call. I've been following your work for years. Are you finally ready to explore opportunities where experience is valued? I looked around the open office at the sea of young faces bent over their screens. at the glass-walled offices where managers younger than my children made decisions about systems they didn't understand. At the corner office, where Victoria was probably already planning how to replace her expensive legacy employee with hungry young talent. "I'm ready," I said. "When can we meet? How about dinner tonight? I know a place in Palo Alto where we can talk without interruption. Say 7 p.m.? I checked my calendar. Amanda had her physical therapy tonight. The kids would be at their after-school activities. Perfect timing to start planning my future without TechVault's involvement. I'll be there. As I hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not excitement exactly, but purpose. The feeling that I was finally taking control instead of letting others define my worth. Victoria thought I was replaceable. We were about to find out just how wrong she was. 4 hours later, I sat across from Hunter Walsh at Alexander's Steakhouse in Palo Alto, a place that required reservations weeks in advance. He'd made one phone call and gotten us a corner table with privacy. That told me everything I needed to know about Quantum Secure's influence in Silicon Valley. Hunter was in his early 50s, gray at the temples, but sharp-eyed, wearing a casual blazer over jeans. No corporate uniform, no power tie. He looked like someone who'd built systems with his hands before he'd learned to manage budgets. When he shook my hand, his grip was firm, but not aggressive. The handshake of someone who didn't need to prove anything. "I've been following your work for years, Brandon," Hunter said, studying me over his whiskey. "Or rather, I've been following the sudden leaps in TechVault's security capabilities that mysteriously coincided with your project timelines on LinkedIn. That threat detection system for the Federal Reserve contract, my team tried to reverse engineer the approach for 6 months and couldn't crack it. I felt a knot in my stomach mixed with pride. Someone had actually noticed. Someone understood the technical complexity of what I'd built. How did you know that was mine?" Hunter smiled and took a sip of his drink. "Because Victoria Sterling doesn't have the technical background to understand even the basics of machine learning algorithms, let alone architect them. I've seen her speak at conferences. She's great at buzzwords, terrible at substance. And because innovation doesn't just happen by accident, someone with deep expertise had to build those systems." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Plus, I have contacts throughout the industry. People talk. Your reputation among actual engineers is solid gold, even if management doesn't seem to recognize it. Half the security professionals in Silicon Valley know your work, even if they've never met you." I took a sip of beer, gathering my thoughts. The restaurant buzzed with conversations about IPOs and venture capital, the soundtrack of an industry that worshipped youth and disruption. Here I was, a 50-year-old engineer in a world that thought innovation stopped at 35. "What exactly are you offering?" I asked. "Senior Director of Cloud Security, oversight of our entire infrastructure division. Base salary $285,000, full equity package that'll vest over 4 years, and a team of 8 senior engineers. Emphasis on senior. Average age on the team is 45. We believe experience creates better code than enthusiasm." My breath caught. $285,000 was more than a third higher than my current salary. Enough to pay for Amanda's treatments without touching our retirement savings. Enough to send both kids to engineering school without drowning in debt. Enough to finally stop choosing between financial security and family needs. But more importantly, Hunter continued, recognition. Your name on patents, your picture in trade publications, credit for the innovations you create. We're not interested in managers taking credit for engineering work. We have a proper IP acquisition process, fair market compensation for proven technology. He paused, studying my expression. And if you brought your personal innovations with you, theoretical systems you developed on your own time using your own resources, we'd handle that professionally. Something flickered in Hunter's eyes. Understanding. He'd done his homework, knew about the legal gray areas that bigger companies often ignored. Quantum Secure wasn't just offering me a job. They were offering to properly value intellectual property that TechVault had taken for granted. I pulled out my leather notebook and placed it on the table between us. Hunter's eyes widened as he flipped through pages of algorithms, each entry dated and documented. Years of weekend work, personal passion projects that had become the foundation of TechVault's competitive advantage. "This is comprehensive," he said quietly. "How much of TechVault's security infrastructure is based on your personal work?" "About 70%, I said. "The core threat detection algorithms, the cloud optimization frameworks, the automated response systems, all developed in my home lab before the company implemented them." Hunter closed the notebook and met my eyes. That's quite an oversight on their legal team's part. "Victoria doesn't value senior functions," I said, echoing the CEO's dismissive attitude. "Too focused on hiring fresh talent to worry about protecting existing assets." We spent the next 2 hours discussing technical details, team structures, and project timelines. Hunter understood the complexity of enterprise-scale systems in a way that Victoria never had. He asked intelligent questions about scalability, security trade-offs, and implementation challenges. For the first time in years, I felt like I was talking to someone who respected both my experience and my potential. By the time dessert arrived, we'd outlined a transition plan that would bring my personal innovations to Quantum Secure while staying within legal boundaries. Everything documented, everything transparent, everything Victoria should have done years ago if she'd valued long-term relationships over short-term savings. 2 weeks later, I placed my resignation letter on Victoria's desk. The irony wasn't lost on me. Printed on company letterhead, submitted through official channels, following every protocol she claimed to value. Professional to the end, even as I prepared to dismantle everything she thought she owned. She barely looked up from her MacBook. Her attention split between emails and a video conference she'd muted, the multitasking that passed for leadership in her generation. 2 weeks' notice. She scanned the letter quickly. "Where are you going?" I'd considered lying, crafting some story about consulting or early retirement, but truth had more impact, and I was done protecting her feelings. Quantum Secure Solutions. That got her attention. Her head snapped up from the screen, eyes narrowing with the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her since that morning's humiliation. "Our biggest competitor. That's unfortunate timing. We're in final negotiations with the Federal Reserve to expand our security contract." "I know," I said simply. "I built the threat detection model that won us that contract." Victoria's expression shifted from surprise to something resembling concern, maybe even fear. For the first time, I saw her calculating what my departure might actually cost the company. "We should discuss retention options immediately. Perhaps that raise you mentioned, maybe 15% plus a promotion to VP level." The offer was everything I'd wanted that morning, more than I'd dared to ask for. If she'd shown this flexibility 8 hours earlier, none of this would have happened. But some doors, once closed, can't be reopened with money alone. The offer from Quantum Secure is $200,000 to $85,000 plus equity, I said. But more importantly, they value experience over age bias. She laughed, but it sounded hollow now. Nothing like the confident dismissal from her office. "They're overpaying by at least $75,000. You'll be disappointed when they realize a 50-year-old engineer can't adapt to their development pace." I smiled, feeling that strange new confidence that came from finally knowing my worth. We'll see who's disappointed. My last 2 weeks at TechVault were surreal. Suddenly, people who'd barely acknowledged me for years wanted to take me to lunch, pick my brain about projects, understand systems they'd ignored. Middle management scrambled to document processes they'd never bothered to learn, realizing too late that institutional knowledge walked out the door with the people who created it. I completed every transition document with professional thoroughness, trained my replacement, a 26-year-old named Kevin Parks, who seemed both eager and terrified, and backed up all my personal project documentation. I also made careful copies of every email where I'd shared innovations with the company, creating an evidence trail of TechVault's failure to properly acquire what they'd freely used. I walked out of TechVault's glass headquarters for the last time at 5:30 p.m. on a Friday in March. By Monday morning, I was sitting in my new corner office at Quantum Secure, explaining to my team of 8 senior engineers how we were going to revolutionize cloud security. Real engineers with real experience. The oldest was 52, the youngest was 38. People who understood that wisdom and energy weren't mutually exclusive. 6 weeks later, the first implementation of my security framework went live at Quantum Secure. The same algorithms Victoria had dismissed as outdated legacy thinking were now detecting threats 48 hours before they materialized. Processing speeds increased 35%. False positives dropped by 55%. Our sales team had data proving we could outperform TechVault's best metrics by significant margins. The machine learning models I'd trained in my garage were predicting attack patterns with 92% accuracy. The threat detection system that had saved TechVault millions was now saving Quantum Secure's clients even more, with my name properly credited on every patent filing. When Quantum Secure announced they'd won the expanded Federal Reserve contract, my phone started ringing. First call was from a trade publication wanting to interview the architect behind Quantum Secure's security breakthrough. Second call was from a venture capital firm interested in licensing our threat detection technology. Third call was from Victoria. I let it go to voicemail. She called 6 more times over 2 days before leaving a message that I saved for posterity. Brandon, this is Victoria. We need to discuss consulting opportunities immediately. TechVault is prepared to offer a substantial compensation package for your expertise. Please call me back as soon as possible. We made a mistake. I didn't return the call. 3 days later, Victoria was waiting beside my car in the Quantum Secure parking garage. She looked different, tired, stressed, none of the polished confidence from that morning when she'd laughed at my raise request. This is inappropriate, I said, maintaining distance while fishing for my car keys. You've put 400 jobs at risk, she said, her voice urgent and desperate. TechVault is facing an existential crisis because of the intellectual property you took. I didn't take anything that belonged to TechVault, I replied calmly. I took my personal, intellectual property that TechVault used without proper acquisition. Your legal team never did their due diligence, and you never valued experienced personnel enough to care about the details. The following quarter, TechVault's stock fell 28%. They laid off 160 employees, but Quantum Secure hired 73 former TechVault engineers within 4 months. Victoria resigned under board pressure and was replaced by a 54-year-old traditional tech executive who immediately began trying to rebuild their depleted senior talent pool. 8 months after leaving TechVault, I received the IEEE Lifetime Achievement Award for contributions to cloud security architecture. Standing at that podium, looking out at an audience full of experienced engineers and young developers working together, I thought about Victoria's comment about advisory transitions. If you're reading this and you're over 45, dealing with managers who think your experience is expensive rather than valuable, remember something. Your knowledge isn't just worth defending, it's worth fighting for. Document your work, understand your legal rights, and never let anyone convince you that your best years are behind you. Age isn't a weakness in tech. It's wisdom waiting to be unleashed. And when experience finally gets angry enough to demand respect, entire industries change. The moment you stop accepting less than your worth is the moment everything changes, because the greatest career victories often begin with the courage to walk away from those who can't see your value.